While the scent of flowers still filled the chapel, and my son's casket had just been closed, she entered. Veronica, the ex-wife who had abandoned him 15 years ago, came in. In high heels and a tight dress, she walked down the aisle, demanding the $24 million of the inheritance, as if she were entitled to it. But what happened next unmasked everyone in that room and unleashed a battle she never expected to lose. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching us from? We love to know how far our stories reach. When the doors of the chapel opened that grey afternoon, my heart was already more broken than I ever thought possible. My son's casket, polished and solemn, rested at the altar surrounded by arrangements of white flowers, his favourites. The hymn he loved had just echoed for the last time among the stained glass windows, leaving a heavy silence that seemed to swallow every breath in the room. It was in that sacred moment of grief that she appeared. Veronica Pike entered the chapel as if she were arriving at a business meeting, not the funeral of the man she had abandoned 15 years ago. The click of her 4-inch heels brutally shattered the silence, making everyone turn. Her black dress, far too chic for the occasion, clung to her body like a second skin. But it was her smile, that calculated, cornered smile, that chilled me to the bone. "I'm here to claim what belongs to me," she announced in a clear, rehearsed voice, projecting it for everyone to hear. "The $24 million my husband left. As his legal wife, I have every right to it." The air was sucked out of the chapel. Some gasped, others turned in stunned silence toward their neighbors, but I did not turn to look at her. Not yet. I kept my eyes fixed on my son's casket, on the brass plate that shone softly with his name. He hadn't even been laid to rest yet, and she was already there, like a vulture, trying to rip away what was left of him. It wasn't sadness I felt in that moment. It was an intense heat rising in my chest, tightening my throat. A silent rage settled heavily behind my ribs. My late husband used to say I had the patience of a stone wall. That day, I needed every last bit of that patience. Veronica's young lawyer was at her side, visibly nervous, flipping through papers in a blue folder. His voice trembled as he mentioned terms like marital status, survivorship rights, and some clause he clearly hadn't read carefully enough. He didn't even know she had waived all her rights in the divorce settlement years ago. I glanced to my left, where Jennifer Sir, my lawyer, was already pulling a discreet folder from her bag. She gave me a small signal. "It's not time yet. Just wait," her eyes told me. The whispers had begun to spread through the chapel like a wave. Veronica's entrance didn't just break the silence. It broke the illusion of peace I had been trying to maintain that day. Mourners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at the floor, unable to watch the spectacle. Others looked at me, expecting me to fall apart, to break under the weight of the insult. But I didn't. Slowly, I turned to face her. Veronica didn't flinch when our eyes met. There was a cold confidence in her gaze, the kind that only exists in people who believe they have won before the battle has even begun. She lifted her chin slightly, proud of herself. Maybe she expected me to beg, cry, or make a scene in front of the altar. But I remained still, and that seemed to unsettle her, because her voice became louder, more insistent. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to take what is legally mine." Finally, I spoke, my voice colder than hers, perfectly controlled. "You are not his wife. Not anymore." For a second, she hesitated. Her lawyer whispered something, turning a page in his documents, but I could see it on her face. She expected me not to know the law. She expected me to be too distraught to react. She thought this funeral was her stage and that I would be too broken to fight back. It was then that Jennifer stepped forward, silent as a shadow, and handed the church official a copy of the divorce decree. Sealed, authenticated. The total renunciation of any future claims to assets had been finalized more than a decade ago. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth was there, printed in official ink, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Someone coughed nervously. Another muttered, "God help us." Veronica stood still, her lips tight, her eyes scanning the pews of the chapel. She was waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. And I stood there, not triumphant, not arrogant, just firm. I spent 15 years raising my son alone, after she left him with nothing but medical debt and a broken heart. I was there for every radiotherapy session, every surgery, every late-night call when the pain came faster than the medication could keep up. She was absent, completely gone until the money was worth coming back for. When I finally turned to leave the chapel, I didn't look back. I walked toward the exit with Jennifer at my side, our steps slow and even, as if we were marching toward a battle that was just beginning. I heard someone whisper my name with sympathy. Another said, "Justice." But I didn't need sympathy. I didn't want justice, not yet. Because I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. What was to come would make the funeral seem like only a prelude. Outside, the wind had picked up, whipping dead leaves around the stone steps. Jennifer caught up to me and silently handed me a brown envelope. I tucked it under my arm without a word. We both knew I would need it very soon. The funeral director met us on the sidewalk, visibly shaken, to apologize for the interruption. I told him not to worry. "Death doesn't always bring dignity," I replied. He didn't know what to say after that, and I didn't need him to. We got into the car. Jennifer drove. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, my hands folded, breathing slowly, not calm, just controlled. There is a difference. It took us exactly 11 minutes to get to the office of Sir and Associates downtown. Jennifer's assistant had already prepared the conference room, closing the door behind us and securing it with a soft click that seemed to seal out the outside world. Jennifer placed 2 documents on the dark wooden table and smoothed them out with precise hands. The first was my son's most recent updated will, dated 9 months before he passed away. I was sitting beside him when he signed it, his hands thin but firm. In the document, he left all his assets to me: the money, the company shares, the property, the insurance, even the intellectual rights to the app he had designed in his final months. There was no mention of Veronica, not a single line. The second document was the divorce settlement from 15 years ago, a total waiver of future rights to any current or future assets, finalized and authenticated. Jennifer had the certified copy in hand, along with the notary's record. Flawless, unambiguous. Still, Jennifer's voice was measured when she spoke. "Veronica has no leg to stand on, but she is bold. I expect this to escalate." I nodded, my jaw tight, not from fear, but from absolute focus. If Veronica wanted to turn this into a war, she would find me on the front lines. I had grieved for my son with every fiber of my being. Now I would defend what he left behind. I would not allow a woman who disappeared for 15 years to turn the final chapter of his life into a legal circus. Jennifer handed me a copy of the asset inventory, carefully listed in categories. I gave it a quick look. Bank accounts, company shares, the lake house, the apartment, even the car. Then I saw the last item, a private video letter recorded by my son and stored digitally under lawyer protection. I didn't know he had done that. Jennifer tapped the folder with determination. "It's time." We drove to the courthouse, not for a formal hearing, but for a meeting Jennifer had arranged with the judge responsible for emergency probate proceedings. It was a courtesy granted due to the size of the estate and the obvious tension surrounding it. He agreed to review the files in advance and confirm that Veronica's claims would be marked as invalid immediately upon presentation. A temporary protective order on the assets was issued within an hour, a record even for Jennifer, who rarely showed surprise, but raised her eyebrows slightly when the document came back so fast. As we left, the sky had grown dark, the clouds closing in like a curtain before a storm. Jennifer's phone rang as we were on the courthouse steps. It was Veronica's lawyer. She answered on speakerphone, allowing me to hear every word. His voice cracked as he asked for a meeting to discuss a possible joint resolution. Jennifer responded with a professional coolness I had come to know well. All conversations were to be in writing, and Veronica's interference in a religious service would be included in any formal response. I didn't speak during the call. I didn't need to. I had spent years being silent for the sake of peace, for my son, for our family. That time was over the moment Veronica said $24 million in front of his casket. That night, at home, I opened the private video letter. My son was sitting in the chair by the window, the same chair where we used to read together when he was just a little boy. His voice was calm, his tone clear and firm, despite his obvious physical weakness. He talked about the foundation he wanted me to build, the community scholarships, the memorial garden behind the tech lab. He talked about me, about how I supported him, about the strength he hoped I would continue to show even after he was gone. Then, near the end, he said something I will never forget. "If she comes back, I need you to stand your ground, not just for me, but for you. She walked away from me, but you, Mum, you never did. You deserve everything I left you. I chose you." I played that last part twice, letting the weight of those words settle on my chest like a hand pressing down firmly, but with tenderness. I didn't cry. Not that night. There would be time for that later. Now I had a decision to make. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a notepad. I wrote down 3 names, 3 people who had stood by my son when Veronica hadn't, 3 people who witnessed things, who knew things. One had access to hospital records. Another had filed the development contracts. The third possessed personal emails that had never been disclosed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. I would not let her rewrite his story, not while I had breath in my lungs, not while I still had his voice in my ears. The next morning, the news spread. Not about the money, that would come later, but about what happened at the church, about Veronica's entrance, about the confrontation, about the silence that followed. My phone rang before sunrise. Old neighbors, distant cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years, calling to ask how I was. But beneath the concern, I could hear something else. Curiosity, hesitation, a slight questioning tone in their voices, as if they weren't sure which side of the story to believe yet. I didn't return the calls. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and watched the sky lighten over the backyard. The same yard where my son had played as a boy, where we had weekend barbecues, where I planted forget-me-nots along the fence during his first round of chemo. It was a quiet space, a good place to think. But the quiet didn't last. Around 10 a.m., Veronica posted a photo, a cropped image of my son from years ago, one she had no right to share. The caption was short: "Heartbroken to say goodbye to the love of my life. May justice be served." Then the comments came in. Most were from people who didn't know or care to know the truth. People who took her version of the story and spread it like fire on dry kindling. There were sympathy emojis, words like brave and unfair and tragic. Some mentioned lawyers, One said she should fight for what was hers. It was at that moment that things changed. I already expected a legal battle. I had already secured the documents. But this was different. This was public. It was image. And if I had learned anything in the last decade, it was that people believe what they see first, even if it is a complete lie. I messaged Jennifer. The response was lightning fast. "We're already monitoring it. We're preparing a timeline for release." Within an hour, my son's CFO, Sarah, called to say she had received 2 calls from journalists asking about the widow. Sarah said that word with a bitter squeeze that I deeply appreciated. I told her to wait. We weren't going to react. We were going to respond. And there is a fundamental difference between those 2 actions. At noon, I drove downtown to meet with Jennifer. She had reserved a quiet room in a private library that used to be a bank. Thick, soundproof walls. We didn't want eavesdroppers. What we had to prepare was no longer just legal. It was reputational. Jennifer presented the 3-part plan. First, confirm the legal standing with the temporary order from the judge and begin the process for a permanent motion to block Veronica's interference. That part was already in motion. Second, gather all the personal evidence my son left behind and all the documentation from the people in his inner circle. Sarah had emails and schedules that proved Veronica never showed up during his illness. Robert had authenticated records of the divorce and property settlements. Daniel, the ICU nurse, had a signed statement about the final week, including the visit Veronica never made. Third, and this was the part Jennifer hadn't told me yet, prepare a public event. Not just a press release or a legal petition, but something real, visible, a public commitment to the foundation my son wanted to create. Jennifer believed the best defense wasn't just a courtroom, it was a crowd, and she wasn't wrong. We chose a date for 3 days from then. The location, the main conference room at City Hall. The mayor had already expressed support for the foundation months earlier, when my son was still alive and quietly laying the groundwork. We still had the letters, the permits, everything he had arranged. We were simply carrying on what he had started. But I was not interested in putting on a show. I told Jennifer that everything had to remain centered on him, not on Veronica, not on me. The cause, the mission, the community impact, that's what mattered. Still, I knew Veronica would come, and I needed to be ready. That night, I visited the old tech office where my son used to work. The lights were off, the furniture covered. The team had moved after the acquisition, but Sarah still had the keys. She met me at the front and led me to his old desk. The chair was still there, as was the mug with a chip in the handle. The whiteboard, with half-erased notes on the app's functionality, in his handwriting that I would recognize in a million. Sarah handed me a flash drive without saying much, just pressing it into my hand with a determined gesture. Inside were the last 2 months of my son's private emails. She had filtered out everything that was irrelevant. What remained were communications about the foundation, his final medical instructions, and his last contacts with legal counselors. Later that night, I sat at my own desk, the same one where I used to grade papers when I taught 2nd grade, and opened the flash drive. There were 3 emails marked with red stars. One for Jennifer, one for Sarah, one for me. The one for me was never sent. He had saved it as a draft. It said, "Mum, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if she shows up, I know it will be hard, but I need you to remember that you're the only one who stayed. You were there when I couldn't walk, when I couldn't sleep, when I was more tubes than skin. You never left the room, so don't let her rewrite what you and I went through. I chose you, not her, never her." It was at that moment that my doubt vanished. It wasn't that I planned to give up. But something inside me became calm. I had carried grief and fury all week. Now I had clarity. Veronica wanted to use public opinion as a weapon. I would raise the truth, not just in the courtroom, but in front of every person who had seen her post and believed the lie. 3 days after the funeral, I entered City Hall through the back entrance. Jennifer had arranged it that way, less noise, fewer eyes. The auditorium was already filling up. Local press, tech investors, community leaders. The mayor's office had confirmed his presence, not to give a speech, but to show support. That mattered more. The event was simple on paper, a dedication, the public launch of the Holbrook Memorial Foundation. But we all knew it was more than that. It was a message. Chairs were set up in rows in front of a projection screen. A banner was hung near the front. A legacy of purpose. My son's face was on the program, smiling in that understated way he always had when he was proud but didn't want attention. That smile would speak for him now. Jennifer and Sarah handled the press check-in. Robert was stationed near a side table with legal folders. Daniel, the nurse, offered to accompany older guests. Everyone had a role. Everyone understood what was at stake. At 12 minutes past 10, the doors closed. At 5 minutes past 10, Jennifer stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone once. She didn't smile. She wasn't there to charm anyone. Good morning. We are here to honor the vision and values of a man who lived with a quiet brilliance and left behind a plan to make an impact. What you will see today is not about loss. It is about intention, about clarity, about truth. She stepped away and the lights dimmed. The screen lit up with a video dated 5 weeks before his death. My son was sitting in a chair, shoulders a little slumped, eyes tired but focused. The background was his home office, the one filled with books and plants and photos that I knew by heart. His voice came through, calm but firm. If you're watching this, I'm no longer around. But I wanted to explain in my own words why I made the decisions I made. I didn't want confusion. I didn't want arguments. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. He went on to describe his illness, his hopes for the foundation, his decision to leave his assets to me and me alone, his reasons. They were not emotional, not vengeful, just measured and clear. She walked away, he said without hesitation. When I needed her most, she wasn't there. And when I built something worth coming back for, she came back. I cannot allow that to define my legacy. I am choosing the person who never left. The room was in absolute silence when the video ended. No coughs, no shifting, just stillness. I stood up, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I walked slowly to the podium, feeling the weight of all the eyes. I had spoken in classrooms for 30 years, given eulogies, birthday toasts, and retirement speeches. But this moment was different. This wasn't about celebration. It was about drawing a definitive line in the sand. I thanked everyone for being there. I acknowledged the mayor's presence. Then I read the names of the first scholarship recipients. I read the names of the local schools that would receive tech support. I described the emergency medical aid fund that would bear my son's name. The audience listened intently. No one interrupted. Then I addressed the situation directly. Some of you may have seen online posts, heard rumors, read comments. I will not respond to gossip. I will respond with evidence. Sarah dimmed the lights again. The screen showed my son's emails, tagged, dated, verified communications with Jennifer, with Sarah, with me. They documented his intentions, his revised estate plans, his cancelled insurance beneficiary designations. Everything. The unquestionable basis of the facts. Then, digitized legal documents, the divorce decree, the signed agreement, the waiver of rights. Highlighted in yellow, the line where Veronica had signed her full consent to relinquish any future claims. Finally, the last slide. A screenshot of an email Veronica had sent to a close friend 6 weeks before the funeral. The message had been anonymously forwarded to Jennifer's office. In it, Veronica wrote, "I don't care what it costs. I'm coming back to take what should be mine. He owed me, and if his mother wants a war, I'm ready." I looked at the audience. That was her story. This is mine. And this foundation, this work, this legacy, belongs to the man who earned it, not the one who left him, not the one who came back when the headlines appeared. A few people clapped. Then, a few more. When I returned from the podium, the entire room was applauding. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I just nodded once and returned to my seat. Veronica was there. I had seen her arrive late. She sat in the back row, sunglasses on, her lips tight. When the lights came up, she got up and left. She didn't make a scene. She didn't speak. But her heels echoed loudly against the floor as she left, as if she wanted to be heard, as if she wanted someone to go after her. No one did. Jennifer leaned toward me. "She's going to come back swinging." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She would try, and we would be ready. After the event ended, people came up to me, shook my hand, told me stories about my son I had never heard before. A college roommate, a mentor from a tech incubator, a father whose son had received free lessons from the app my son built in his final year. That afternoon, a photo of the event appeared on the news. Me standing at the podium, one hand on the lectern, the other holding the program. My son's face on the screen beside me. The caption read, "A mother protects her son's legacy." And that's exactly what I had done. Publicly, clearly, without screaming, without anger, but with every fact sharp as a knife. The next morning I woke to silence. No new texts, no missed calls, no emails from Jennifer. But I didn't mistake the stillness for peace. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. At 8:30, Jennifer sent me a single message. "Stay off social media." Her tone was always controlled, but I could feel the urgency behind those 4 words. I obeyed, but I didn't have to wonder for long. Sarah called 30 minutes later. Veronica posted something, a video clip, chopped up edits of your son out of context. She makes it look like he regretted changing the will. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The event at City Hall had rattled her. Now she was playing dirty. That afternoon, Jennifer and I met again in the same private room in the old bank building. She had already downloaded the clip, backed it up, transcribed it, and had a team verifying its edits. There was no full footage to pair with it. No record of those words in any raw files. It was a fabrication, but it was subtle enough to deceive people who wanted to believe her. Jennifer turned her laptop screen toward me and pressed play. My son's voice came through, but the phrases were cut, rearranged, the pauses removed. He seemed unsure, overwhelmed. Then Veronica's voice was layered over it. She spoke gently with false sympathy, but every word implied I had manipulated my son into excluding her. She had even titled the video, "Let the Truth Be Heard." It was already being shared in every corner of the internet. The comments turned quickly. Strangers called her brave, others called me greedy. Some suggested I had isolated my son during his illness, driven away his friends, cut off his contact with his ex-wife out of jealousy. Lies grow fast on the right ground. But we didn't panic. Jennifer already had the next move planned. The first part of Jennifer's plan was simple. We would release the full video in question, the intact version, with timestamps recorded in a single take. Robert had the original on a secure drive, protected by passwords and authentications that proved its integrity. The second part required more coordination. By the end of that day, Sarah had managed to get permission from 3 of my son's former business partners to share internal communications, archived emails, meeting notes, messages from my son expressing his frustration with Veronica's behavior over the years. In one message dated 2 years before his death, he wrote, "She contacted me again, not to ask about my health, not to apologize, just to see if the IPO had gone through. I'm tired of pretending people care when they don't. I don't have the energy for this anymore." Jennifer compiled all of this into a meticulously organized packet labeled Documentation of a Pattern of Behavior. Clean, professional, devastating in its simplicity. The next morning, we held a press conference. It wasn't flashy, no elaborate podium, no dramatization, just a conference room with a projector and printed packets for every person in attendance. Jennifer opened with a single phrase that resonated through the room. "Disinformation is dangerous. Here is the truth." Then we played the full original video. My son's unedited message, calm, clear, confident. He explained his decisions without hesitation, without confusion. He named me as his sole executor, his sole caregiver, his only remaining family. We distributed the written evidence. We gave time for questions. We didn't offer sound bites. We didn't create narrative spins. We simply presented unquestionable facts. Veronica did not respond publicly, but she didn't need to. The damage to her credibility was already visible. That night, one of the community blogs that had praised her earlier issued a discreet retraction. Another removed her manipulated video. A third posted side-by-side transcripts showing how the clip had been altered. Still, it wasn't enough. Not for me. The facts were on my side, but I wasn't just after facts. I was after absolute clarity. So, I made a decision. I called Sarah and asked her to release the internal memo my son had written during his last hospitalization. It had been intended for the company's board, but the tone was deeply personal. The memo detailed his plan for the foundation, his reasons for creating it in my name, his desire to distance the organization from anyone who had abandoned him. At the end, he wrote, "I don't want my name used for anything fake, anything shallow. If people are going to remember me, let it be for what I actually did and who actually supported me." Jennifer hesitated before agreeing. It was a powerful piece, but it would also stir things up again. I told her that was precisely the goal. The memo was released at noon, with the board's consent and backed by the foundation. It did not attack Veronica directly. It did not mention her by name, but it exposed every lie she had told simply by existing, like a ray of light that dispels shadows. By the evening, I began to receive messages. Strangers, survivors of serious illnesses, caregivers, people who had watched loved ones die slowly and alone. They wrote to say they understood. They believed me. They had seen people show up too late just to claim something they hadn't earned. But even that didn't satisfy me completely, because Veronica was not finished. At 10:30 that night, Jennifer called me again. "She filed a motion to contest the will. She alleges your son was coerced. She alleges he was not of sound mind when he made the final changes." I asked Jennifer how strong the allegation was. "Weak," she replied, "but it will force a formal response. It will initiate discovery. It will open up records." I told her I wasn't afraid of the records. Let her go for it, because the deeper she digs, the more she will uncover the truth she was trying to bury. This was no longer just about a lie. It was about character, and character has a wider reach than money. The motion arrived late on a Thursday. Jennifer forwarded the document to me at 9:42 p.m., exactly as I knew she would, clean, annotated, with a short note at the bottom. You don't need to respond yet, but you should see this. I read every page with meticulous attention. Veronica's legal team accused me of undue influence. They alleged my son had been emotionally manipulated, that I had isolated him, that I had coerced him into rewriting the will when his mind was clouded by medication and illness. They called me controlling, oppressive, ruthless. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same table where I used to spread out science projects and vocabulary flashcards, the same table where I had shaved my son's head after his first round of chemo, trying to make him laugh as his hair came out in clumps. Now that table held an accusation that I had stolen from him, that I had bent him to my will, that I had used his pain for my own gain. I allowed myself to feel it completely, not the anger, not yet. The pain. It settled in my chest like something old returning, something with weight, something I thought I had already made peace with. That pain came back that night, because reading that motion was reliving every hour I had sat by his side, every time I had held a vomit bag in one hand and his fingers in the other, every time I had pressed the morphine button when the nurse wasn't getting there fast enough. They called me ruthless. But they weren't there when I read to him while he was nauseous, when I changed the sheets at 3 a.m, when I massaged his feet so he could sleep. They weren't there the night he woke up screaming and couldn't remember what year it was. They weren't there the afternoon he asked me, clearly and with full capacity, to make sure she never received a penny. I was. So I let the weight settle. I didn't fight it. I didn't push it away. I poured myself a glass of water. I stayed still, perfectly motionless, as I let the words wash over me. And I reminded myself exactly who I was, not the woman they described on paper, but the mother who stayed. The next morning, I met with Jennifer at her office. She had already drafted our initial response, but before filing anything, we sat in silence for a while. She watched me, as if she were waiting for me to give in, or explode in anger, or break down in tears. I did none of those things. I simply said, "We're going to make this clean. We're going to make this final." She nodded with a small smile of approval. We agreed to prepare a full sworn affidavit. The testimony of Daniel as the nurse, the statement of Sarah as the CFO, the authenticated records from Robert. We would include the entire chain of emails documenting my son's requests, his voice recording, his private memo, everything. But I didn't want the next step to be just legal. I needed something more. I told Jennifer I wanted to write a letter, not for the courtroom, but for the foundation, for the community. She hesitated briefly but agreed. That weekend, I sat down with a pen and wrote by hand. I kept it simple. I am not my son's voice, but I am the echo of what he believed. He believed in justice, in decency, in the truth that doesn't need to shout to be heard. He built what he built, not for fame or legacy, but because he wanted to solve a problem, to leave something useful behind. I stayed by his side. I didn't do it for a reward. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I loved him and because I believe in what he wanted this foundation to be. The following week, Jennifer filed the full rebuttal. It was longer than the original motion, more detailed, more substantial, with irrefutable documentation. Then we waited. During that time, Veronica did exactly what I expected. She went to the press, gave interviews, played the role of the inconsolable widow. She spoke of love and memory and a broken heart. She shared carefully selected photos. She cried when the cameras demanded it. But something had changed. The public was no longer so sure. Some articles began to use the word alleged before her claims, Commentators began to reference the full video, the emails, the glaring contradictions between what she was saying and what the documents showed. The truth doesn't always move fast, but it moves steadily and relentlessly. Jennifer told me it could take weeks for the judge to review the motion. She warned me that Veronica might push for a hearing, try to delay things, try to wear us down over time. I told her I wasn't worried because I had already waited for worse things. I had waited for blood tests and biopsy results, and the sound of machines beeping in the middle of the night. Waiting for court dates and document reviews didn't scare me. Not like watching your son fade day by day, hour by hour. During those days of waiting, I kept myself busy. I spent mornings at the foundation office reviewing scholarship proposals, meeting with the new director, putting together evaluation panels. I made sure the work moved forward. I kept my hands busy so my heart wouldn't feel overwhelmed by the weight of the wait. One afternoon, as I was reviewing budget reports, a volunteer came in with a letter. It was handwritten, with no return address. Inside was a simple message. "You are not alone. I believe you. I watched my sister be destroyed by someone like her. Thank you for speaking up." There was no signature, just those few lines. It reminded me that what we were doing wasn't just about property or inheritance. It was about putting the story in its rightful place. Not with fire, but with focus. Not with volume, but with unquestionable truth. This was what Veronica never understood. She thought power came from noise, from dramatic accusations. But I had learned that real power comes from consistency, and I would be consistent until the end. The decision came on a Wednesday morning. It was discreet. No television, no camera crews, no screaming headlines about justice or fraud. Just a notification from Jennifer that the court had issued its ruling. She had forwarded the official copy to my inbox, 212 pages. I read every one. The motion to contest the will was denied in its entirety. No trial, no hearing. The judge had found the evidence clear and convincing. My son was of sound mind. He had made his decisions deliberately. There was no sign of coercion, manipulation, or external pressure. Veronica's allegations were described as unfounded, speculative, and in several instances, intentionally misleading. That last phrase mattered more than all the others. Intentionally misleading. In courtroom language, that meant more than just losing. It meant exposure. It meant vulnerability. It meant consequences. The next step moved faster than even Jennifer expected. Within 48 hours, the court ordered a hearing to review possible sanctions against Veronica's legal team for misuse of process, abuse of the system, attempting to deceive a probate court with altered materials. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Initially, I didn't plan to attend. I had told myself the denial was enough, that I didn't need to see the consequences, that I already had what I came for, my son's wishes protected, his legacy intact. But 2 days before the hearing, Jennifer called. Veronica had sent a last-minute request. She wanted the hearing to be closed to the public, citing emotional distress, claiming it would prejudice her reputation, alleging it would interfere with her ability to seek employment and rebuild her life. The judge denied her request. It was then that I decided I would be there, sitting in the back row, silently witnessing the end of this story. I arrived early on the day of the hearing. The room was small, no media, just the parties, their lawyers, and a few court clerks. Jennifer sat beside me, her posture relaxed but alert. Veronica walked in 5 minutes before it started, wearing a navy blue suit that was overly formal for the setting. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't look around the room. She knew I was there, but she didn't face me. The judge entered. The hearing began without ceremony, without drama, without theatrics. just a methodical analysis of what had transpired. They reviewed the motion Veronica had filed, the video she had posted, the way it had been edited, the sworn affidavit that contradicted her version of events. They analysed the financial records, the legal history, the pattern of her communication with people close to my son, the timing of her appearance, her social media statements before and after the funeral. They disassembled everything, piece by piece, exposing every contradiction. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been misled, that she hadn't fully understood the risks, that she had acted out of grief. But the judge interrupted him with words I will never forget. Grief for a man she abandoned does not excuse the manipulation of this court. By the end of the hearing, it was clear the sanctions would be severe. Veronica's lawyer would face a formal review by the state bar. She would be ordered to pay the legal fees associated with responding to her fraudulent motion. The amount was considerable. The court issued a freeze on her accounts, pending payment. It wasn't prison. It wasn't a national scandal. But it was the legal version of a reckoning. The truth finally collecting its price. I watched her face as the judge read the decision. Her expression did not change, not once. But her hands betrayed her apparent calm, clenching, unclenching, one after another in a nervous rhythm. When the judge closed the hearing, Jennifer and I got up. We didn't approach Veronica. We didn't linger. But as we walked toward the exit, she turned slightly. Not enough to make eye contact, but enough for me to see the vacant look in her eyes. She had entered this battle thinking she could bend reality to her will. She left with her name stained in official court records, her finances blocked, her story unraveled as a web of lies. That afternoon, Jennifer sent a statement to the Foundation's press contacts. Brief, professional. The Holbrook Foundation respects the court's findings and remains committed to carrying forward the mission defined by its founder. We consider this matter resolved. No triumphalism, no tone of revenge, just finality. I sat in my backyard that night alone, on the same bench where my son once sat after his first clean scan, and breathed in the quiet. Not complete peace, not yet, but the quiet that comes after a door finally closes. In the weeks that followed, the foundation flourished. We received more offers for partnerships than we could accept. The first scholarship recipients were already being selected. The memorial garden behind the lab began to take shape. As for Veronica, she disappeared from public life as completely as she had disappeared from my son's life 15 years earlier. No more posts, no more interviews, no more letters or emails or attempts at contact. One day, I received a piece of mail, a simple envelope, no return address, just my name on the front. Inside, there was no letter, just an old photo of my son as a boy and a piece of paper with a single word. Sorry. I didn't respond. There was no need. That chapter was closed, not with a shout or a celebration, but with the calm certainty of someone who protected what mattered. I still receive letters from women I have never met, from daughters watching their mothers suffer, from mothers watching their children become strangers. They don't ask for magic, just for truth, and I give it to them, simple and unshakable. You are not alone. You never were. Your story doesn't end with the abandonment. You can draw the line. You can take the pen again. And even if the world never applauds, your piece is the most important applause. Now, if you liked this story, give it a like to support us and click on this next video that's appearing on the screen, because in it, there's a story of betrayal and a twist like you've never seen before.